The carriage lanterns threw shifting light across the Duchess of Ashworth's face as they rolled toward Melcombe House. Helena sat opposite her husband, Alexander, the Duke, who was scanning a letter by the narrow flame as though she were not there at all. She watched the familiar angle of his jaw, the way his concentration created a wall thicker than the polished wood at her back. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of running Brightwood Hall, overseeing 54 servants, reviewing ledgers after midnight so he would not be troubled. 3 years of arranging dinners for diplomats who never learned her name, of standing beside a man who could negotiate trade routes with breathtaking precision, yet could not recall the color of her eyes. She had been 20 when they wed Bright with Hope, believing his reserve hid a tenderness that intimacy would unlock. She soon learned the reserve was not a shell but a permanent fixture, a climate rather than a season. The carriage halted. A footman opened the door and Alexander stepped out without a backward glance. Helena gathered her silk skirts and followed, the March wind biting through her cloak. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of candlelight and perfume. Alexander was drawn into conversation with Lord Melcombe, and Helena stood at his elbow, her smile fixed and pleasant. She made the correct remarks, laughed at the correct moments, and silently kept a mental tally of everything awaiting her attention at home. The French envoy's upcoming visit, the menu the cook had submitted that needed revision, the crumbling East Tenant cottage that required funds Alexander had not yet authorized. Then Alexander said it. "My wife is an excellent manager of trifles. She handles the domestic details so I can focus on matters of actual consequence." He spoke to Lord Melcombe as though she were a well-trained housekeeper. His tone carried no malice, which made it worse. It was simple fact, spoken without thought, without awareness that she might be listening. Helena's smile did not falter. She excused herself gracefully, moved through the crowd and found her way to the terrace doors. The cold air hit her face, clean and sharp. She walked until the music faded and only the rustle of bare branches accompanied her. She did not cry. Crying was a luxury she had trained herself out of long ago. Instead, she stood very still and let the decision settle over her like frost. Tomorrow, the French envoy was expected for a 4-course diplomatic dinner. She had not finalized the seating chart. She had not approved the wine selection. She had not instructed the housekeeper on the special linen requirements. For 3 years, she had never once left a task incomplete. Tonight she would not return to the house early. She would not stay up past midnight making lists. She would do nothing. The weight of it was terrifying and wonderful. She stayed in the garden until she heard the carriages being called. When she returned to the entrance hall, Alexander was waiting, his expression mildly irritated. "There you are. I have been standing here 5 minutes." Helena met his gaze. "Have you?" Something flickered across his face, a hesitation, but he merely gestured toward the door. She climbed into the carriage and leaned her head against the velvet squabs, closing her eyes. She felt his glance like a feather touch, there and gone. Back at Brightwood Hall, he retired to his study. Normally, she would go to her writing desk to review the next day's instructions. Instead, she walked to her bedchamber, dismissed her maid with a quiet word, and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was silent. In the morning, the machinery of his carefully ordered life would begin to grind without its engineer. She pulled the pins from her hair one by one and let them fall. The first sign of disorder came at 7:30, when the housemaid discovered the dining room unset. The second came at 8, when the cook, already agitated by the missing menu approval, burned the breakfast ham. By 9, the housekeeper had knocked twice on the Duchess's door and received no answer but a calm, "I am not receiving visitors today." Helena sat in the small sitting room adjoining her bedchamber, a cup of cooling tea at her elbow, reading a book she had started 2 years earlier and never finished. She heard footsteps in the corridor, hurried, male, increasingly agitated, and turned a page. The door opened without a knock. Alexander stood on the threshold. his cravat only half-tied, his dark hair disordered. He looked around the room as if searching for the wife he recognized and finding a stranger in her place. Helena, the French envoy, arrives at 4. The housekeeper is in tears, the footmen are quarreling, and I have just been informed the guest chamber chimney smokes so badly the room cannot be used. What is the meaning of this? She closed her book carefully, marking her place with a ribbon. The meaning is that I have managed these things for 3 years without acknowledgement. I find I no longer wish to. He stared. You cannot simply stop. I have stopped, she said. It is already done. The silence that followed was not angry. It was hollow, the sound of a man suddenly aware that the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had assumed. If this is about what I said to Melkum, it is about every word you have spoken and every word you have withheld. Her voice remained steady, though her heart knocked against her ribs. It is about standing in ballrooms and dinner parties as a piece of furniture. It is about spending 3 years making your life seamless while you could not be troubled to ask me a single question about my own. Alexander's jaw tightened. She knew that expression. He was preparing a logical rebuttal, the kind that won arguments in Parliament but healed nothing between two people. You could have spoken sooner, he said. I spoke 100 times. You never heard me. He had no answer. He stood in the doorway like a man who had walked into a wall he had been told was a door. After a long moment, he turned and left. Helena exhaled. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she pressed them flat against the book's leather cover. She had not raised her voice. She had not wept. She had simply told the truth and let it lie between them. The house continued to creak and groan around her. Somewhere downstairs, a footman dropped something that shattered. She did not rise. At noon, a maid brought a note from Alexander. It was brief and characteristically direct. I have moved the dinner to the White Hart Inn. We will discuss this tonight. Helena folded the note and set it aside. Tonight, she would not be available for discussion. She intended to walk to the village and visit the lending library, an activity she had not permitted herself since the early months of her marriage. She dressed simply, in a wool walking dress of deep blue, and took only a footman for propriety's sake. The March air was damp but clean, carrying the scent of turned earth. She felt exposed walking the main road, as though everyone she passed could see the crack running through the edifice of her marriage. But no one stared, no one knew. At the library she chose a novel, a Gothic tale full of secret passages and doomed passion, and sat in the window alcove to read. The hours slipped past. When she returned to Brightwood Hall, the lamps were lit, and a figure stood at the top of the stairs, waiting. It was Alexander, still in his morning coat, his expression unreadable. The dinner was a disaster, he said. The diplomat's wife is allergic to shellfish. I served crab soup. Helena paused on the stair below him. I was not aware. No, he looked at her as though seeing her for the first time in a long while. You were not there. She continued past him toward her chambers, feeling his gaze follow her. She did not turn around. Within a week, the Ton had begun to whisper. The Duchess of Ashworth was indisposed, they said at first. Then, more pointedly, the Duke has quite lost control of his household. Lady Jersey remarked at a card party that dear Helena had always seemed so capable, and wasn't it strange how these quiet ones could unravel? The speculation slithered through drawing rooms and morning calls, attaching itself to Helena's name like damp. She ignored it. Each morning she rose and walked the estate's boundary paths, visiting tenants whose names she had always known but whose homes she had only seen through the lens of estate ledgers. Old Mrs. Barlow, whose cottage roof needed repair, offered her strong tea and a piece of seed cake. The farm steward's wife confided her worries about her son's enlistment. Helena listened, made notes, and promised nothing she could not deliver. She had stopped managing the Duke's life, but she had not stopped caring for the people on his land. That distinction steadied her. Alexander, meanwhile, was learning the price of invisible labor. He canceled a political dinner after forgetting to engage extra kitchen staff. His study accumulated a drift of unanswered correspondence. Twice, his valet appeared in mismatched waistcoat and coat because no one had laid out his evening clothes correctly. The household functioned, but poorly, like a clock missing its central spring. One evening, Helena was in the small salon, mending a torn sleeve of her walking dress, when the door opened and Alexander entered. He looked tired. The lines around his mouth seemed deeper, and there was a crease between his brows she had not noticed before. "May I sit?" he asked. She gestured to the chair opposite. He sat heavily, resting his elbows on his knees. "I owe you an apology," he said. Helena set down her needle. "For the crab soup." A ghost of something, not quite humor but near it, passed across his face. "For that and for a great deal more." He paused, struggling visibly. "I have been thinking about what you said, about not being heard." She waited. "I remember you telling me about the East Tenant cottages 6 months ago. I remember you suggesting repairs before winter. I remember nodding and walking away." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "The roof collapsed at Barlow's cottage yesterday. No one was hurt, but it will cost 3 times what it would have." "I know," Helena said quietly. "I visited her this morning. I have already arranged temporary lodgings." He looked at her sharply. "You did that?" "Someone had to." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Alexander's hands clasped tightly. "I never intended," he stopped. "That is not true. I intended nothing at all. I simply assumed you would always be there, handling everything. It never occurred to me that you might choose otherwise." Helena picked up her needle again, not to continue mending, but to have something to hold. 3 years is a long time to be assumed. "I know," his voice was hoarse. "I am beginning to understand." He rose and walked to the window. Outside, the last light was draining from the sky. When he spoke again, it was almost to himself. "I do not know how to fix this. I do not know what you need." Helena considered the question. It was, she realized, the first time he had ever asked it. "I need to know that I matter," she said. "Not for what I do, but for who I am. I need to be seen." He turned from the window. In the dim light, his expression was stripped of its usual arrogance, revealing something rawer underneath. A man who had built walls so high he had forgotten anyone might try to climb them. "Then I will learn to see," he said. She did not answer. Words were easy, she had learned that long ago. But somewhere in her chest, a small, stubborn ember, long buried under ash, gave a faint pulse of warmth. The charity bazaar in the village was an annual affair, and Helena attended not for pleasure but because the tenants expected it. She moved among the stalls in a sprigged muslin gown, purchasing honey and ribbon and exchanging pleasantries, when a familiar voice spoke her name. "Your Grace, I had hoped to find you here." Lord Theodore Renly stood beside the bookstall, a volume of poetry in his hand. He was tall and fair, with a quiet humor in his gray eyes, and he had once, many years before, asked her father for permission to court her. She had liked him. She might have loved him, given time, but her father had seen a dukedom and aimed higher. "Lord Renly," she curtsied, genuinely pleased. "I did not know you were in the country." "Only just arrived. My aunt's health has been fragile." He fell into step beside her. "I heard rumors in London. I wanted to see for myself that you were well." "I am perfectly well." "You have always been an accomplished liar." He said it kindly. "The last time I saw you was at your wedding. You smiled then too, but your eyes were somewhere else entirely." Helena stopped walking. The bazaar buzzed around them, full of laughter and bargaining, but she felt as though they stood in a pocket of stillness. "Theodore, I am not the same girl you knew." "I should hope not. That girl was trying to convince herself she wanted a life she had never chosen." He offered her the book of poetry. "I bought this for you, Keats. I remembered you admired him." She took it, her gloved fingers brushing his. "Thank you. That is unexpectedly thoughtful." "Not unexpected, I hope. I have thought of you often." Before Helena could respond, she sensed a presence behind her, a particular density in the air, a familiar scent of sandalwood and starch. She turned. Alexander stood 10 paces away, his expression carved from stone. He was dressed for riding, his boots dusty, and he looked between Helena and Lord Renly with an intensity that made the space between them feel charged. "Renly," he said, the word clipped. "Ashworth," Theodore bowed, perfectly correct. Perfectly unruffled. "I was just renewing an old acquaintance with your wife. We knew each other as children." "Did you?" Helena stepped forward. "Alexander, you remember Lord Renly from the Melcombe Ball 2 seasons past." "I remember." His gaze dropped to the book in her hands. "You are buying poetry." "Lord Renly was kind enough to gift it to me." She held his eyes, calm but unyielding. A muscle flickered in Alexander's jaw. He turned to Theodore. "My wife and I have estate matters to discuss. I am certain you will excuse us." Theodore looked at Helena, a question in his eyes. She gave a tiny nod, "It is all right," and he bowed again. "Of course, Your Grace." To Helena he added softly, "Enjoy the Keats." He walked away into the crowd. Alexander did not move. "Estate matters," Helena said quietly. "Is a chimney smoking again?" "Who is he to you?" The rawness in his voice startled her. She studied his face and saw something there she did not recognize. Not anger, but fear. The fear of a man who had only just realized something precious might be lost. "He was a friend," she said. "Once he was nearly more. My father chose otherwise." "Do you wish he had not?" It was a dangerous question, and they both knew it. Helena felt the weight of the book in her hands, the smooth leather cool against her palms. "I do not live in wishes, Alexander. I live in the life I have. I am only now learning how to do that honestly." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You cannot command away a man's kindness simply because it frightens you. If you want me to stay in this marriage, you must give me reasons, not demands." She walked past him, toward the lane that led back to Brightwood Hall, and this time she did not look back to see if he followed. He did. She heard his boots on the gravel, a pace behind, all the way home. The rumor arrived on a Tuesday, delivered in a letter from Helena's cousin in town. Someone, no one could trace the source, had been whispering that the Duchess of Ashworth had suffered a collapse of the nerves, that she had abandoned her duties and retreated to the country in a state of feminine hysteria. The word hysteria was being passed around the clubs like a snuff-box. The implication was unmistakable. The Duke's household was in shambles because his wife was mentally unfit. Helena read the letter at the breakfast table, her face betraying nothing. Alexander, seated opposite, watched her fold the paper with precise, deliberate movements. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. As he read, a flush crept up his neck, the only sign of anger she had ever seen him unable to control. "This is slander," he said. "Malicious, contemptible slander." "Yes. I will find who started it." "It does not matter who started it." Helena's voice was quiet. "What matters is that people believe it, or want to believe it. A woman who steps away from her duty must be mad. There is no other explanation that suits them." He stared at her, the letter crumpling in his grip. "You are not mad." "I know." She met his eyes. "But I have spent 3 years being invisible. Perhaps madness is simply what they call a woman who finally speaks." Alexander rose from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. The silence stretched. "I will issue a statement," he said finally. "I will make it clear that any slight against my wife is a slight against me, and I will hold those responsible to account." Helena rose and walked to stand beside him. "That will cost you political capital, friends, influence." "I do not care." She looked at his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the set of his mouth, and saw something she had missed in 3 years of careful observation. He was not merely angry, he was ashamed. Deeply, personally ashamed. Alexander, she touched his arm lightly. He flinched, then stilled. Why does this matter so much to you now? He was silent for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a small, worn journal, its leather cover cracked with age. He placed it on the windowsill between them. This was my mother's. I found it when I was 12 after she died. She wrote about my father, how she loved him when they wed, how she tried to reach him, how he treated her with the same indifference he showed the furniture. His voice was low and rough. She wrote that she was slowly disappearing, and he never noticed. She died of a fever, but I always believed she died of loneliness. Helena's throat tightened. She looked at the journal, then at him. I swore I would never be my father, he continued. I swore I would not marry a woman I could hurt like that, so I kept you at a distance. I thought if I never let you close, I could not wound you the way he wounded her. A bitter, broken sound escaped him, not quite a laugh. I wounded you anyway, the exact same way. She picked up the journal, holding it gently. You are not your father, Alexander. You are here now telling me this. He would never have done that. It may be too late. I do not know if it is. She placed the journal back on the sill next to his hand. But it is a beginning. He looked at her then, and the walls that had stood between them for 3 years seemed, for a moment, thinner than paper. A storm hit the county in early April, tearing slates from roofs and flooding the lower pastures. Word came at midnight. The river had breached its banks near the mill, and 3 tenant families were stranded. Alexander was already pulling on his boots when Helena appeared in the hall, dressed for the weather, a lantern in her hand. You should stay here, he said. I should not. She was already moving toward the door. I know those families, I know the children's names. You will need me. They rode together through the lashing rain, the carriage fighting mud and wind. At the mill they found chaos, water rising, livestock panicking, a young mother weeping as she clutched her infant. Helena waded through the shallows without hesitation, her skirts heavy with water, and began directing the evacuation with a calm authority that cut through the panic. Alexander worked beside her, carrying children to higher ground, his voice steady and reassuring. By dawn, everyone was safe. They had lost 2 sheep and a cart, but no lives. The tenants huddled in the village hall, wrapped in blankets, drinking tea that Helena had ordered from the nearest farmhouse. She moved among them, speaking softly, touching shoulders, remembering each name. Alexander watched her from the doorway, his coat sodden, his hair plastered to his forehead. She was exhausted. He could see it in the shadows under her eyes, but she did not sit down. She would not sit down until every person under her care was tended. He crossed the room and took her elbow gently. Helena, it is done. They are safe. She looked up at him, and for a moment her composure wavered. I was so afraid, not for me, for them. I know. He drew her away from the crowd into a quiet corner near the hearth. I watched you tonight. I watched you lead, comfort, and organize, and I realized I have never truly seen you work before. I have only ever seen the results. She leaned against the wall, suddenly weary. It is different when you see it. Yes. He took her hand, the first time he had done so outside the formal requirements of a dance or a dinner entrance. His grip was warm and steady. What do you want, Helena? Not what duty requires. Not what you think I want. What do you truly want? She looked at their joined hands, then at his face. The question was enormous, terrifying in its openness, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to answer without editing. I want a partner, she said. I want someone who sees my work and values it, not because it makes his life easier, but because it is mine. I want to be loved for who I am, my stubbornness, my long silences, my ability to manage a flood at midnight. Her voice caught. I want what I wanted 3 years ago when I married you. I wanted you. Alexander's hand tightened on hers. I am here. I have been a fool and a coward, but I am here. If you will let me, I will spend the rest of my life learning to be worthy of what you already gave. She did not answer with words. She simply turned her hand in his and laced her fingers through his own, holding on. Outside, the rain had stopped. The first pale light of morning crept through the windows, touching the faces of the sleeping children, the quiet families, and the man and woman who stood together in the corner, beginning again. The season's closing ball at Almack's was a crush of silk and candlelight, and Helena entered on Alexander's arm with a composure that felt earned rather than performed. She wore deep green, his mother's emeralds at her throat, a gift he had given her the week before with a quiet, "They were meant for someone who would wear them as you do." She had not asked what he meant, she understood. Whispers still followed them, but the tone had changed. The Duke of Ashworth had been seen walking with his wife in the park, not ahead of her but beside her. He had danced with her at 3 separate gatherings, not the obligatory 2 dances custom prescribed, but as many as he could claim without causing comment. He had publicly corrected an earl who referred to Helena as the little wife with a frosty precision that left the man stammering. The Tun had noticed, and the Tun was reassessing. Lord Renly attended the ball. He approached Helena during a pause in the music and bowed with genuine warmth. "You look happy," he said. "I do not think I have seen you look happy before. Content, yes, efficient always, but not happy." "I am learning," she said. "It is a slow education." "The best kind." He glanced toward Alexander, who stood across the room in conversation, but whose eyes tracked Helena with quiet attention. "He watches you like a man guarding something irreplaceable." "He is trying," she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "We both are." Theodore took her hand briefly. "Then I am glad, truly." He released her and melted back into the crowd. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Alexander crossed the room and extended his hand. "May I?" She placed her palm in his. "You may." They moved into the dance, and for the first time in years, Helena did not count the steps or monitor the room or anticipate the next demand. She simply danced, feeling the warm pressure of his hand at her waist, the gentle guidance of his lead. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about the East Wing." "The East Wing." "It has been closed since my mother died. I thought perhaps you might want to open it, redecorate, make it something new. A music room, a library, a place for tenants, children to learn, whatever you choose." She missed a step, then recovered. "You would give me an entire wing." "I would give you more than that." His voice dropped, intimate and earnest. "I spent 3 years giving you nothing but tasks. I want to give you choices now. Space, freedom, whatever you need to build a life that is yours, not just mine." The music swirled around them, and Helena felt the sting of tears she refused to shed. "You are not merely trying to buy my forgiveness with architecture. I am trying to show you that I understand." He drew her slightly closer, still proper but with a warmth that bordered on improper. "You managed everything for 3 years. You stopped, and I deserved it. But you also started something. You started us truly for the first time. I do not want to lose that." "You will not." She looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her face. "I stopped because I was breaking, Alexander, but I am not broken now. I am here. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the floor, surrounded by the glittering Tun, and he lifted her hand to his lips. It was a gesture he had made 100 times before, a formal, empty courtesy. This time his eyes held hers, and the kiss was soft and deliberate, a promise pressed into her skin. "Then we begin," he said. She smiled, a full, unguarded smile that belonged only to him. "We already have." Outside, the London night was cool and clear. Inside, 2 people who had nearly lost each other held on, not out of duty, but out of a love finally, fully understood. The years ahead would hold storms and missteps and all the ordinary trials of a life lived together, but they would face them the same way they had faced the flood. Side by side, hands laced, neither managing alone.